got a short review to give you today. A book I bought yesterday and read. Whose Body? Lord Peter Wimsey. Mystery. This is by Dorothy L Sayers, a very smart woman, one of the first to earn a degree at Oxbridge. And she wrote this as her first book, which became a series, ultimately 11 books. But this is the first one, and I read it because I wanted to start at the beginning and work my way through. So it's set in the 1920s, and actually you can see the design is quite Art Deco, which is quite appropriate. Lord Peter Wimsey is a sleuth, an amateur sleuth, who is quite posh and tends to go around with a monocle and a cane and a walking cane, and he has a valet. So it's a little bit like Jeeves and Wooster in a sense. His valet in this particular case is called Bunter, which is unfortunate because it makes me think of Billy Bunter, the sort of boyhood stories of the English schoolboy. But anyway, that's beside the point. I find that a bit of a distraction. But together they still like to solve a crime. Bunter is good at taking photographs, and that means then you can enlarge and have a look at people's fingerprints and so forth at the cases. And Lord Peter Wimsey has a kind of very offhand way of doing it all, as if he's quite bored by life and this is something that keeps him amused. He doesn't have to do it. He's very wealthy. He's actually a book collector, which is another reason why some folks might be interested in following this book. For people who are readers already anyway, you'd understand where he's coming from. And Dorothy L Sayers very famously did a great translation of Dante, which is still rated highly all these years later. And lo and behold, there's references in this to particular issues of Dante, and he sends his valet to go and bid on some particularly special manuscripts coming up. One of them is a throwaway line. He says, "Oh yes, the Vatican has the other copy." You know, that's the kind of level we're talking about. But anyway, the action is that a body has been found in a bath, totally naked, with separate pince nez, which was the old spectacles without the legs at the side. And the body has turned up in a very respectable, quiet, shy, man's bathroom out of the blue, where he lives with his mum. And Lord Peter Wimsey starts to try and put things together. At the same time, a very wealthy industrialist has gone missing, and is it the same person? Is it not? What's going on? And the plot keeps you guessing, keeps you going through it all. Dorothy L Sayers, as I say, is a very interesting person in her own right, and she's given Lord Peter Wimsey a very interesting particular background, in that he has been in the First World War and he suffers from PTSD. Now, this book was written in the 1920s, and there's still a very vivid description given of it, where as he gets to the crux of solving this mystery, with all the pressure that's going on, he has this impression of being back in war and that people are trying to get at him, and it's very powerful. And of course, at that point, your nerves are on edge because you're about to find out who the murderer is and what's happening. So that gives it another dimension. The way it's sorted out at the end is quite different, in that you don't have the usual detective calls everybody into the room and then explains what's happened. It's done in a more interesting way, but you do get the satisfaction of knowing what happened, the details, and yeah, it's done in an interesting way. Through it all, you also get the way that Lord Peter Wimsey will debate things and say, well, maybe this, and he has a policeman friend who will say, but that would mean, and it's back and forth, so you get the feeling it's not set in stone from the start, that he knows automatically who it is. There's little bits of having to sort things out, which gives it a kind of feel of being more real. The characters are interesting. There's insight into human beings, human motivations, and yeah, the setting is also interesting. It's quite glamorous. And Dorothy L Sayers said that at the time she was living in an unfurnished bedsit, one-bedroom flat in London, and she was not making ends meet very well. But so she took the joy in having Lord Peter Wimsey living in gorgeous circumstances, and she recommends it. That's what she says in the introduction, which is quite handy to have since she's been so long ago. At the time, I was particularly hard up, and it gave me pleasure to spend his fortune for him. When I was dissatisfied with my single unfurnished room, I took a luxurious flat for him in Piccadilly. I can heartily recommend this inexpensive way of furnishing to all who are discontented with their incomes. And that also gives you a sense of how she writes. That she is eloquent and interesting, and there's a sense of humour at play there. There's a playfulness, and yeah, that keeps the story moving along. I'm not an expert on crime thrillers. I went through a phase at one point of reading Agatha Christie till it got to the point where I could tell who the murderer was almost from the first few chapters. So I'm looking forward to getting involved in reading this series of books. Something it helped me with, and it might be for yourself, is that I'm reading a lot of books at the moment that are more non-fiction, more reference. They're the kind of books that it's going to take me quite a while to read, to think about, to understand. This I got read in one day, and that was a wonderful palate cleanser. It made things so much simpler, and it restored my faith that I can read at a fairly good pace. So I recommend this to you as a crime thriller worth reading. This book feels like a mix of two incredibly successful authors, and that is P.G. Wodehouse for the sense of humour, the time it's in, the environment of being a rich young thing in the 1920s, but at the same time it's got that detective work that Sherlock Holmes did. And also Lord Peter Wimsey is helped with a policeman called Parker, in the same way that Sherlock Holmes is helped by Lestrade of the Yard. So that's all for me and from Lord Peter Wimsey for now. Cheerio.